Thank you. Wow, Jordan was the first young person friend my son made when he came home and had determined to be sober. And I am so grateful to her for her influence and her friendship to him and to our family. First thing I'd like to say is, as far as stuff that the school does wrong, I can't tell you what goes on here. But I think the fact that there's a drug counselor, that there's someone here to talk to, should be more well. It shouldn't be on page 5 of the handbook. It should be on a stamp, on a sticker on the front. Because had I known that, I could have gotten some support earlier. Because as I started to realize there was something wrong, at every turn, I was dissuaded from that. My husband said I was crazy. Well, you know, that could be true anyway, but my son was cutting study hall, and the dean called and said, oh yeah, he's just got bad cases, senioritis. At least we know he's not one of the druggies. Imagine my surprise when he was arrested 2 weeks later here at the high school with drugs. When he was arrested, we sent him immediately to rehab. We used all of his college money. He went to Hazelden. He went to detox in Northwest Community Hospital first for a month, and then he went to Hazelden because I wanted to send him to the best place. I figured it wasn't the time to use a coupon. The surprise to me was, I wasn't one of those moms who condoned anything. My oldest son, the first time he had a drink in front of me, he was 30 years old, and when I looked at him, I said, wow, you've never had a drink in front of me before, and he said, that's because you've always been such a freak about it. So I wasn't somebody condoning anything. And when he went to high school, he could have no sleepovers. I mean, he could have kids come to our house and sleep over because, you see, I paid attention. Not those other moms. Those moms of those drug addicts and those alcoholics. Not me, such was my arrogance. We had a curfew, strictly enforced. I didn't give any money, he got a job. He never got to drive, we didn't get the cars because I was famous for the irritating quote of bees get keys. No bees, if you don't get all bees, no keys, sorry. And yet, here I stand thinking I'm gonna protect my children. I sent them to private school for 7th and 8th grade because I didn't want them at the public junior high. I'm going to protect and control the environment to such a degree that they'll be fine. And yet here I am. My son has a disease, and the disease is substance abuse. It's not any different if it's alcohol or if it's drugs, and you're kidding yourself if you are. To say somebody is an alcoholic and a drug addict is like saying I'm from the Loop and Chicago. One is simply a subset of the other. Substance abuse is the issue. He has a disease and it made it so much easier for me to deal with when I could look at him as you would look at someone who is a diabetic, but every day had to buy that bag of Oreos and eat it. It was destructive. It is a progressive disease. And not every kid who drinks or does some drugs has this disease, although they can drink and drug their way into dependence. What I found out when my son went to, we then said, oh my God, it was because the summer before, his appendix had burst, and he spent 3 weeks on morphine, followed by 2 weeks on Vicodin, followed by another week on morphine when he had appendix finally out, followed by 2 more weeks on Vicodin. Now, why wouldn't I get him detoxed? Well, no doctor said anything to me about it, and he complained about that he didn't like the feeling of the morphine and the Vicodin. But when he stopped using it, he was having withdrawals, and he never told us a thing, but he could get everything here at the high school, starting with Xanax. And then he got into harder and harder drugs, because before the hospitalization, hard drugs frightened him. But after that, he was not frightened. He was addicted. Now, you say, wow, that poor kid, but what we found out in drug rehab was that a couple years before he started drinking, and he was drinking every day. Why didn't we know it? I mean, when he came home, he had to have a conversation with me, and there better not be mint on your breath. I know what that's covering up. Why didn't we know it? Because he said he didn't want to get drunk. He had 2 drinks every day to feel normal. That was a crushing statement to hear. To feel normal, my son had to drink. He said, I hate to feel socially awkward. I hate feeling like I don't fit in. And I was able to fit in with alcohol. So his senior year, this all spiraled out of control until he was arrested here. Now, here's a kid who had a job, which is how he bought the drugs. He was able to graduate then in the mid-senior year, because we pulled him out and sent him to rehab, but he had enough credits to graduate mid-senior year. He had not been in trouble. He'd not gotten arrested. None of those things happened. And so we were pretty sure he was okay until we found out that he wasn't. In our family, I decided to go to Families Anonymous. And that saved my life. And it saved his too. Because when he relapsed, 2 weeks out of a 4-month stint in rehab, I could get the support I needed when I found out he'd relapsed. Some months later, I found out he was living in Minneapolis, and I'd found out. And I had to do the hard thing. Now, here we are, parents. The hard thing, yeah, it's the sleepovers, it's the curfew, it's enforcing things, it's being involved, it's not giving money. They don't have a right to that money. They don't have a right to the car. It's not necessary to send them to college if you think they're going to go there and come home in a body bag. And what I heard other people have said, hard things. I've heard of people who've had their children arrested to save them. They have thrown their children out of their house. My son was up in Minneapolis. He was working. Here's his thought process. Well, I'm working. I'm doing drugs. I pay all my bills, and then I use what's left for drugs, and, you know, kind of like nobody's business. Really, you can't argue with that. I said, if you're arrested, don't call me. I will not come. That was the hardest thing I had to say. Well, eventually he lost his apartment. His roommate didn't pay his half of the rent. He was evicted. He lost his job. And a man who we call an angel in our home took him into the emergency room. He went to rehab. He went to a detox center. By that I mean a drunk tank. The smell was unbearable, and there wasn't a full set of teeth in the place besides my kid. And I did not run up to get him. I talked to people in FA, and one of them came up with a suggestion, said, why don't you go get him for dinner? And just talk to him and see what the next move is going to be. But when I got there, things had changed. Because I hadn't run up, because he'd been in there in that terrible place for 5 days. When he came out, I said, he said, Mom, yesterday I had a moment of clarity. I looked around and said, my God, this is what my thinking gets me. A woman at the detox center, the nurse, said, why don't you go to a meeting? And he did. And he said, I was finally in enough pain to listen. What I'm saying to you is, don't enable them. Let them hit bottom. The sooner it happens, the better off you'll all be. Get some help for yourselves. Go to FA. There's a meeting at 7:30 Tuesdays at First United Church. I go to Hazleton on Dearborn in Chicago, 6 o'clock on Tuesdays. You will get support. You will learn things about yourself that you never knew. And just to say one more thing, the first step in AA is I am powerless over drugs and alcohol, and my life has become unmanageable. But our first step in FA is I am powerless over drugs and alcohol and other people's lives, and my life is unmanageable. Thank you for listening.